Let me ask you this. Why is family drama so predictable on the one hand and so unavoidable on the other hand? Like, how often can you see drama, some family argument coming from a mile away, and yet you cannot seem to prevent it from happening? If you've seen The Bear, there's a great illustration of this problem, like the Christmas dinner episode. There's the mom is like threatening to explode throughout that whole episode, and everybody can kind of see it coming, but no one can prevent it from happening. Family arguments are like this. They're often super predictable and yet unavoidable. But this is not just the stuff of fiction. The Reddit forum Our Family is filled with posts about exactly this type of family dysfunction. My brother and I always fight, and I am getting tired of it. Always asks me for money. Dad never calls me. She does this every single day. My parents break my heart every time I come home. So why is family drama so predictable and yet so unavoidable? I think we can learn something about why this happens by looking at Greek tragedy. I'm a university professor. I teach a lot of Greek tragedy, so I have lots of opportunities to think about Greek tragedy. And I've learned something from reading that stuff that has helped me make sense of families and how they work, I think. I think the ancient Greeks understood something about families and why they drive us so crazy. For instance, do you know the story of Oedipus? You've heard about Oedipus. He's the guy who was fated as a baby to murder his own father and marry his mother. So that's not good. So his parents tried to avoid this fate by shipping baby Oedipus off, like getting him out of town to prevent this from happening. But then Oedipus is raised into adulthood by another family. He comes back to his hometown of Thebes as a stranger and unwittingly ends up killing his father and marrying the woman who happens to be his mother. And while married to his mother, Jocasta, he has children. They have 4 children together. And in this very, very famous play by Sophocles, Oedipus Rex, Oedipus suddenly learns what he's done, and he's so horrified he gouges out his own eyes, right? That's the famous story. So the odds are your family is not as messed up as this family. This is a really messed up. This is like the archetypal messed up family. And you might think this is a crazy, outrageous story. What could be the lesson here? What could I possibly learn from this story? I think there's lots of things. There's different ways to read this, but a few years ago I had a kind of insight into this story and what I think it's about. The insight, I think, really has to do with Oedipus's children. Like, think about his children. How do you live knowing that your mother is also your grandmother and your dad is also your brother? Like, that's the family you're brought into, right? And chances are you're going to be pretty messed up by it. And in the stories about this family, we learn that Oedipus's 2 sons, Eteocles and Polynices, they kill each other fighting over control of Thebes. And in this play, Oedipus at Colonus by Sophocles, Oedipus's daughter Antigone says this: "Oh, the misery! Now it is ours, all ours, and not for the moment now, but all our lives. We wail the death, the curse on the blood, our doom, born in us by our father." So for a second, think about this idea of cursed blood, a cursed bloodline. The children of Oedipus and Jocasta, the children Oedipus had with his mother, feel as if they are cursed, and their lives turn out to be quite tragic. And I think the thing I realized reading this play is that, like, this is obviously an exaggerated example. This is an extraordinarily tragic family, but this feeling that your blood is cursed, that you have inherited problems from your parents or your grandparents. Isn't that kind of a common experience? There's a point, I would say, as we become adults, that we start to realize, whoa, I'm just like my mother, or I'm just like my father. Or we look at our siblings and see that they're exactly like our parents. That something in our blood has determined something about our character. And I think this is the thing about that ancient Greeks understood about families that makes something clear for us. The reason sometimes like drama and conflict feels inevitable and predictable is because there's like a pattern like built into us, like this inborn tendency or habit. Families have patterns that are very hard to break. And those patterns are often passed down from generation to generation. And this is part of why our family conflicts are both predictable and unavoidable. We see them coming because they're very familiar to us. We've seen them many times before. They're unavoidable because for whatever reason, it's very hard for us to break these patterns that are in our blood. When we're reading these plays, I think we ought to understand a curse as a symbol. It's a symbol. It's a literary device in many ways. It's a symbol of these inherited problems, these things that are passed down across generations. Greek tragedy in general is fascinated by blood curses and family drama. It's not just Sophocles. Aeschylus, another Greek tragedian, that's good. Tragedian. Aeschylus was writing about this stuff too. He wrote this trilogy of plays called the Oresteia. They're about Agamemnon of Trojan War fame and his wife Clytemnestra and their son Orestes. And the middle play in that trilogy, it's called The Libation Bearers. And the plot of that play, it's about Orestes, who has to avenge the murder of his father. Agamemnon has been killed. The only problem is Agamemnon was killed by his wife Clytemnestra, because Agamemnon's pretty terrible, right? So in order for Orestes to get revenge for the murder of his father, he has to kill his own mom. I gave you your life. Let me then live out my own. Live here in my house? You, my father's murderer? My child, fate played a part. I was not all to blame. Then here's another death, decreed by the same fate. Are you resolved, my son, to murder your own mother? It will be your own hand that strikes you dead, not mine. Beware the hounding furies of a mother's curse. How shall I escape my father's curse if I relent? You'll notice in these passages the language like fate and curses, and it's these very old-fashioned ideas that I think can actually help us make sense of our own sometimes tortured family dynamics. One of the modern representations of this, I think that we're all familiar with, is Encanto. This is a movie about intergenerational trauma. It's about how things that happened in the past to our ancestors and shaped our ancestors continue to shape us in the present. So we might think in terms of intergenerational trauma. I think for the Greeks, they thought in terms of fate. Like this, in some ways, this is what fate was. We often think of fate as this supernatural force. I'm not sure it really is. I think in some ways, it's just the nature of being human, which includes the nature of being born into a particular time and place, into a particular family. That's your fate. You didn't choose any of that, and yet it powerfully determines who you are. Here's why this is so frustrating. This is like why this drives us so crazy. I think it has to do with choice. Think about really most of the relationships in your life. Think about your friends, your coworkers, acquaintances. These are relationships that are, for the most part, chosen. And maybe your choice isn't entirely free with your neighbors or all your boss. Maybe you can't totally choose those people. But if you decide to move away, there's no obligation to keep in touch with a bad neighbor. You can quit your job. Romantic relationships, marriages, they're like this too. They have this element of choice. We enter into them freely. I would like to spend my life or my time with this person. But family is more complicated in a way, because in most cases, it is not chosen. Our parents, our siblings, we don't choose those. We enter into the world as part of a family. We love to talk about freedom, free will, free choice, free speech. We want to be independent people. We want to be individuals. But family just kind of happens to us. We do not enter into them by choice. And they have a profound shaping effect on who we are and what our lives are like. I feel this profoundly even as a dad. I got kids. I try to do my best, but I'm just the card they were dealt. And I'm sure that can be frustrating for them sometimes. And this may seem weird, but I think Greek tragedy has actually helped me think about family a bit more clearly, because I think it helps me recognize the ways that I am constrained. Maybe the curses in my blood, why I am the way I am. And there are certain things about myself that are very hard to change. And so I just have to manage these things in myself, and maybe we just have to manage these things in ourselves. And you can also recognize this about your other family members. I think it kind of makes you a bit more empathetic to see oh, right, this is the burden that you bear. This was your fate, and it somehow constrains the way that you act and respond. And I think if there's patterns, if there's cycles that we want to break out of, then we've got to think about, okay, well, what role do I play? How do I participate in these patterns? And is it possible that I can break these cycles? Greek tragedy is very rarely about what other people did wrong. It always has this, there's always a call to self-reflection. I think it's important to recognize the ways in which we are constrained and not entirely free. Like, not every choice is up to us. And that can be frustrating. It can also be kind of liberating, right? Like, some things are not our responsibility. Some things are not our fault. And so maybe we ought to be kind of merciful to ourselves, but then also extend some charity to the other members of our family, because they too are constrained by fate. If you like this video, you can check out another one over here. If you want to support the channel, you can do that on my Patreon page. Maybe I'll see you there. I'll talk to you soon.